Hello. Welcome to this week's episode of Pilot Light, a podcast where increasingly we watch Netflix TV shows that aren't really pilots at all, and then we talk about them in a completely incorrect context. My name's David, and Sam, I fucked another guy.
Good for you. Glad, I'm proud of you. Fuckity, fucking fuck. It's a Judd Apatow show.
And I'm Joe, and for the love of God, will someone fucking fire Rob?
Lots of fucks in this episode. I'm going to put an explicit tag at the start of this, I think.
Yeah. So this week we watched the 2016 Netflix series. It is not a large burp. It is Love, which is actually quite a difficult TV show to Google. Just FYI. Which is a TV show starring Gillian Jacobs and Paul Rust, I believe.
Mm-hmm. Yep, I think that's his name.
Which has had 3 seasons. Anyone seen a second of this before I said we should watch it?
No.
Nope.
No.
Haven't even heard of it.
Netflix ads. So this, I think, is going to be definitely one of our last Netflix shows for a while, because we've done a lot this year, and it is kind of hard to apply our premise to a Netflix show because, like, the function of the first episode of Love, the TV show, is not to make you want to watch this program and pick it up and to pay them to make the rest of the series. The function of this first episode is like, does this make you want to grab them a remote and stop it auto-playing the next episode? Which is a much lower bar.
Yeah. It's one of
they don't have to work quite as hard in the first episode, do they?
No.
They know they have like another 9 episodes following it to kind of...
As we talked about last week in The Haunting of Hill House, like, the economics of television have changed. And that's just how it is. Sam, before we get any deeper into the Netflix of it all, give me a plot summary.
So, this is a program that follows a couple who must navigate the exhilarations and humiliations of intimacy, commitment, and other things they were hoping to avoid. It's a Netflix TV series. You're right, Dave. Like, we have done a lot of these shows, and I think it's a symptom of, there's loads and loads and loads and loads of these type of things.
It's a symptom of our cheapness and refusing to pay for TV shows.
It's not even just that, guys. I think it's just like I don't watch broadcast TV at all. I would, if I wanted to watch something that was broadcasting on TV, I would have to live stream it on iPlayer because I don't have an aerial plugged in. And that's, I think, why we tend to gravitate towards these, especially with newer shows. We tend to gravitate towards Netflix shows. It's just because
it's also the idea of having to wait for the next episode is now so alien to everybody. I can't imagine. So the thing that's always been that's in the thing here at the moment, everybody's watching seems to be that Line of Duty. And the idea of waiting for another episode to come out every week is just completely alien to me. The whole idea. I've not watched it, but
we did it with WandaVision. We watched every episode as it came out, and that was quite quaint for the first couple of weeks. And I was like, "There's the rest." I want to consume this and be done with it.
Stop dragging it out. Come on, just
like someone gives you a meal, chip by chip, one a week, and you're like, "For fuck's sake, I've been eating this for 6 months. I cannot. Just give me the rest."
It's part of the reason I stopped watching Game of Thrones when that was being released, because I got to season 3.
I'm looking forward to reading the books about Game of Thrones as a television phenomenon, the last monolithic water cooler show ever.
The death rattle.
Yeah.
Totally.
But this is not the Game of Thrones podcast. Let's talk about this episode of television. So as we mentioned, Sam, it's...
I'm gonna go.
Stars Gillian Jacobs and Paul Rust, and it's kind of like the brainchild of Paul Rust, who plays one of the main characters, Judd Apatow, as we've mentioned, and a third person whose name I don't have in front of me.
Right. So Joe can look at that. So yeah, Judd Apatow. That's what I was gonna start with, because he is one of those, he's very successful, probably one of the defining, if not the defining, comedy minds of 2000s cinema. You know what I mean? You've got all of these films, 40-Year-Old Virgin, probably the biggest example, but it's probably the one that really, I think, cemented him and that comedy style. The kind of like, the fuckity fuck, gross out, and everyone's being a bit obnoxious, but it's kind of like endearing at the same time.
Crummy, and we talk a lot when we talk about the comedy from the 2000s about my magnus opus, the the comification of comedy, and Judd Apatow is kind of like the 40-year-old virgin standing at the pinnacle of like that is one of the cummiest, like quote unquote family comedies ever made. It's very sexual, very slapstick. It's the American Pie factor. And we should say before we move on too much, I know you guys probably haven't seen it, but he also did Freaks and Geeks, which is a very short-lived TV show about high school kids, which is excellent. And also where he met everyone he was going to cast in anything he ever made again. Seth Rogen's in it. James Franco's in it. Linda Cardellini's in it.
So before we move on, the third person is Leslie Arfin, who is actually married to Paul Rust. They married in 2015. But
we're going to have to be really careful to not just say Paul Rudd.
Rust. She was a writer for the HBO show Girls, and she's worked on Brooklyn Nine-Nine, and actually drew on her own past in dealing with alcohol addiction while writing this show. So there we go.
So that sets up like where we are with this type of comedy, and I think it's very much in that vein, isn't it? The first part of this episode is, it's very sweary. It's very real as well. Like there's a reality, there's a grounded reality to this. I think it's like a bit, maybe a kind of comedy / drama type of thing going on.
It's almost like two episodes in one. There's like one part follows one character, one part follows the other, and they don't really like join together until literally like the last minute of the show. So it's almost like two pilots wrapped into one, really, with two different storylines, and it just kind of flits between the two of them.
And it's tonally odd. Like, this is an episode, because let's talk about the plot a bit more. Let's talk about, just off the top of my head, let's talk about Paul Rust first, as his like arc in this episode. Maybe, being three white dudes in our 30s, like, that's the easiest one to connect with. So Paul Rust's character, like, in this episode, he's a nerd, he's a bit of a loser, he's in his early 30s. His long-time girlfriend dumps him, and he has to like move into. I love, by the way, in America, like these sad apartments for single men that we get in every sitcom, every single TV show or film ever made in America. Even in Frasier, there's like a sad single man apartment complex. So he has to move into his. Exactly.
I'd just like to point out he technically dumps his girlfriend because she cheated on him. It's not he jumps in.
Ultimately, Joe.
He's got all the power in that relationship. Obviously. Yeah.
But so he moves out into this apartment, like, and the thread for him is kind of like this, being at a loss in your 30s and sort of not starting again as such, but like, well, where do I go now? Like, that was the long-term relationship, and I'd never even considered that not happening. We get a bit of his work life, but really it's not a factor in this, and it's kind of him like. Still, being quite young in your early 30s, but also being old as fuck because, like, if you talk to an 18-year-old when you're 30, I can attest to you feel 55 years old.
It's being single again all of a sudden after being in a long relationship as well, isn't it? It's that's what it's about as well. Yeah. It's kind of like readapting to life as a single 30-year-old.
This is something I think that Judd Apatow has like mined quite heavily in terms of. Obviously, there's the 40-year-old virgin and that kind of thing. There's also This Is 40, which stars...
With Paul Rudd, not Paul Rust.
Paul Rudd and the woman who's the main woman in it, who I can't remember her name.
I can't remember her name, but she's also in... They're two characters from Knocked Up, one of his other movies. That film is a spin-off of Knocked Up.
Yeah, Leslie Mann is her name.
Yeah.
And... like, so we get... it's the kind of usual thing of, I think, the unique... change that's happened in the last 20 years or so, in that a lot of people in their 30s are not really they're not really following this Dave. They're not
but what right
the same. There's like a track. There's a track that you're supposed to follow, which is in your 20s. That's when you go off and you have
1.5 children, house with a picket fence, 2 cars.
yeah. Well,
Just
no,
like
I'm saying
Sam. Just like our
me.
esteemed friend Sam.
But in your 20s, you're supposed to do that, and then in your 30s, that's when you're supposed to be settled and everything. And because of the terrible economic environment that we've grown up in, because of like the complete changing in demographics and all these other things, like that's not the reality for a lot of people. So where do these people go? What are they left with? And the TV shows we're seeing now are there to kind of like explore that, so that when you get this guy, and more so the woman,
Gillian Jacobs.
Yeah, who's a loser. I mean, she is a loser. Like that's
she's a drug addict, basically. Yeah.
Yeah. Who is, in a toxic relationship with this guy who's, not very
who can probably do better. I think it makes a good point of showing that she could do better for herself, and she's kind of, just kind of accepting, rather than actually, really doing everything that she could possibly do.
Well, just in settling. Yes, but at the same time, it's kind of like a reflection of, I think both of these main characters, not necessarily almost any other character on the show, because none of them have a second facet, but these 2 main characters do seem to have different facets of themselves. Like Gillian Jacobs, especially, I think, like treads a decent line between, she has a job and everything and other responsibilities, but she's also a bit of a mess. And I'm a man in my 30s who's, not got it all together. And that makes sense. Lots of people do. It's the same with Paul Rudd's character. Like, he is a bit of an arsehole. And when he breaks up with his girlfriend at the beginning and she's like, oh, you're nice, but you're like fake nice. And he is. And, but it's like kind of like his realization of like, fuck, am I a dick? And it's kind of like that. Yes. The lie is, when we're young, the lie was that like by 30 you'll be settled down and married with kids and like everything will be fine and you know exactly what's going on, and then you're an adult. And like, actually, no. The difference between being in your 20s and being in your 30s used to just be that you'd have more money, and now we don't even have that.
It is that real lie, isn't it? It is that real lie that I think is told mostly by universities. Go to university and you'll get a fantastic job guaranteed, which ended up being
and parents as well. Like your parents when you're young as well tend to be like, oh, you need to know what you're doing, that sort of thing,
Yeah.
Because they fucking do. Yeah, my parents are in their 50s and they still don't have their shit together, Like,
yeah.
So it just leads me to believe that it's all a lie. It's all a lie. I'm going to be 80 years old and be like, I wonder if I'll ever grow up.
Do as I say, not as I do, Dave. That's what it is.
Yeah.
I use that all the time with my son. So excellent line. Very, very good. So this show is about exploring all that, and as we've talked about, Judd Apatow is good. I think at that as well. I think he is good. I think he's able to capture a truth and express it in a way that's entertaining. Like it's not a really depressing, miserable show. It's actually quite light. It's quite funny. The bit where they're at the start where the guy Paul Rudd. When Paul Rudd is picking, when Paul Rudd is picking,
Paul Rudd.
Rudd.
He's everywhere now. There are 3 of him.
when Paul Rudd is picking the carpet, and they're like, says, oh well, yeah, go for the blue one, and the girlfriend's like, oh, well, I like the orange, and he's like, oh, the orange is fine as well. I very much relate to that, like of just expressing an opinion. Actually, I don't really care. It's fine. Just do whatever you want. Like. There's a lot of truth. There's a lot of truth to, I think, that. Less probably, I in terms of my relationship and how I relate to the characters, less so with Gillian Jacobs, because I think she's much more on the extreme end of like she really doesn't have her life together, even more so than you, Dave. As a very I think like she is really unsettled and has this horrible relationship, massive or significant drug problem anyway, and I'm interested. I think it's compelling to see her arc. Where is she going to go with this? I think that's more than Rudd.
Just as a sidebar, I think you guys have read that slightly off. I think she's an alcoholic in this TV show. I don't think that she's necessarily, certainly in this episode, she does take unprescribed drugs, but I think that's the through line is that she has an alcohol problem, not that she has a drug problem.
She's popping Ambiens, like There's no tomorrow.
Yeah, but like it's established. It's not like
a substance problem then.
Yeah.
Either way, yeah.
I just wanted to delineate that because obviously we've only watched the first episode. I was reading actually some reviews because as a Netflix show, they don't get the write up that 90s sitcoms got when the internet came around. So I think just because the audience for them is so much smaller than when we had 6 channels. So, but as far as the reviews go, apparently, I mean, not so much this episode, but Gillian Jacobs' portrayal of somebody with addiction problems is pretty well done, I think, and pretty and obviously you mentioned, Joe, that it comes from the mind, the Arfin's personal experiences, and I think that's something that critics certainly thought shone through in this series because it's not always easy to do, is it? We talked last week on Hill House about that character who's he's a drug addict and he's in rehab, and it's the tropiest possible, he's robbing,
stealing iPads and cameras immediately, as we saw in Hill House. Yeah,
exactly, and that's kind of one end of the it's drugs, no, drugs are bad spectrum, and then this is kind of the more actually people usually do drugs because of other to cope with other issues that they might have.
In this case, it's to escape the mundanity of life, effectively.
Who would take substances to escape the mundanity of your life?
I don't know, to be honest.
Cheers for that.
Sam, that's a slimline lemonade.
I know, it's diet lemonade. I'm currently on baby could come at any moment duty, so I can't drink. But when I can, don't you worry, I'll be hammering back those whiskies live on air just for you, listener. And that's a really good point, Dave, about substance and how her life is difficult, and she's obviously struggling in lots of different ways. And there's interesting relationships with, I think, a sister or one of her friends. It's not a positive thing that she's got going on around her. And that response of fuck, I'm just going to take some Ambien because that's going to make me feel better. If you're in that,
sorry, what? I'm right there. Go on.
If you're in that situation, who are you to say that you wouldn't react in the same way? Do you know what I mean?
I haven't reacted in that same way. It feels very real, the taking drugs or drinking to excess, as a way to cope. That's something that maybe TV and film they're not always bothered about exploring. They're not always bothered about exploring that because, it's easier to just say drugs are bad. Actually, let's explore why this person feels compelled to take drugs. It's not just because drugs are fantastic. It's because drugs and alcohol, they, basically deaden you to the world. It's the same as people who are on antidepressants. It's a similar thing, but just going a different route for it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. What about Paul Rudd's character then? We have this thing about we always miss. We call characters the wrong name, and I quite enjoy it. It must be very confusing for everyone else.
Can I just say though that you could entirely see Paul Rudd playing this character. It's 100%. The exact character that you could see him playing.
Paul Rudd is too good looking to play this character, and I mean that in the best way possible. I think Paul Rust in this, I'm going to admit something here. Sam texted me to say "Oh, you're an average-looking guy in your early 30s," and I was like, "Is Paul Rust an average-looking guy?" No offense to the guy, he's a successful actor, director, writer, and comedian, but certainly not one of the classic beauties. And that's kind of lends itself quite well to the series as a whole, I think, is that it's nice actually to see normal looking people on TV, to see people who aren't supermodels, and it would be harder to swallow this guy being he's just a bit of a loser and he just doesn't have much backbone. And we see him get his girlfriend leaves him because of the same reasons, and he dumped her, as you said, Joe.
Well,
apologies. But we see him at work where he gets walked all over, and he's just a bit of a loser. I
like that he gets dumped because she has sex with somebody else, obviously not very satisfied generally in a relationship, and his response to that, is almost the reason. Is just because I just don't want to be the way that you deal with things. This false nicety is horrible, as we've said. So it's I think it cements it well in the first few minutes of the problem that each of these characters faces within themselves, and then.
Although as much of a loser as he is, he almost gets a threesome and then manages to fuck that up. So quite impressively.
I think he's okay on that one, Joe. Like, well, let's just talk about this now. So we have the series of plot lines. He's in his like pathetic, like we should say, quite spacious with a balcony apartment. His pathetic bachelor apartment. Oh, this guy, American, sort yourself out. And he plays frisbee with some like teenagers who are outside. And then they invite him to a party, and he goes, and it's a bit like, I don't know if I would go to a party with teenagers.
I totally wouldn't. We wouldn't, Dave. We absolutely wouldn't.
Absolutely not, because I honestly, who can? Like, I would have to be so not sober to have.
Because
I'd just like to point out that we wouldn't even get invited.
You wouldn't get invited. I'm the cool guy.
We wouldn't get invited.
We wouldn't get invited at all.
And even if we did, we'd be too busy recording a podcast to go.
Yeah, so we are we are bigger losers than Paul Rust's character in this.
Absolutely.
So the storyline there is that he goes to this party. He's like, there's all these people who are on like a summer college trip or something. And essentially these two girls are like, hey man, you want a threesome? And he's like, yes. And we get like this is peak Judd Apatow, like a bit of nudity, like suggestive, and then it just goes like silly town. And it turns out that he's like, oh, why don't you two kiss? And they're like, oh no, we're not into that. Like, we're sisters and we're not going to kiss. And he's like, record scratch, like, what? They're like, oh yeah, we're sisters. And he's like, you're sisters? And you both, when he quite rightly says, so we're not really going to have a threesome, but we're going to have like two twosomes. He's like, I really enjoyed the dialogue in that scene, but it's a weird, like, wow, this suddenly took a left turn, this TV show.
Yeah. It's you're spot on about being like peak Apatow, because this is it's that kind of cringe comedy thing.
Yeah.
And it's very much like if you were invited to have a threesome, imagine.
I'd take a twosome.
I'd be fine with just one woman.
One and a half of them, Christ. Well, I'm at the table, I'm bargaining.
You both put yourself out there on the internet right now, so if there's anyone watching who wants to snap that up, then you know where to tweet us.
If anyone out there's into really hairy white dudes who have a podcast, you're in luck. There are loads of us. Almost all podcasts are three hairy white dudes.
Yeah, thank God I got married already. That's very fortunate. So, but if you were in that situation, imagine, then it would be awkward as fuck. Like the whole thing, it's not going to be like the movies or pornography. It's the whole thing is going to just be like, okay, so I mean, where am I going to go and where do you want to? Like, it's just awkward as shit, and I really like that portrayal of it. And then we have the sister thing, which is interesting.
It's funny, and like what's funny about it is his totally like normal, like you can see his brain working and being like, oh, threesome, sexy women. Oh, they're sisters, and he's like, bing, bing, bing.
Can I get into trouble for this? Can I? Is this illegal?
That's not okay. That's what am I okay with that? And you can see him kind of like again, like it's a good performance and like it's a funny bit. And then when they're like, well, fuck you, man, if you don't want to have sex with two sisters, and I'm like, I'm kind of with him. He's like, well, there's one of you want to stay. Like I really love how pathetic that is, and it's delivered in such a way as well. And they're like, no, and he's like, but fair dues. You don't ask, you don't get.
Absolutely, yeah. I do question that if a guy this pathetic, this guy much of a loser, would this be the line for him? Do you think he'd actually be like, well, that's fine. Like you only live once. You got to experience these things, and they don't want to kiss each other, so there's no incest technically going on. Technically, maybe, I don't know. I'm not going to bat for this. I'm not going to bat for this, to be clear.
I'm not sure we're qualified to be the incest police on this scene. I think we'll leave that to the actual police.
Okay. I'm not sure a crime would be committed.
No, I don't think there would be a crime. Yeah, I don't think there would be a crime there. No.
I don't want to get mired down in whether the legality of incest.
So, Dave, what do you think about incest?
Like, we'll really have like a podcast statement on that. I think this scene's funny.
Well, I think we should. I think we should say
goes.
we're very anti-incest on this podcast. I think that's the side we should be on, Dave. We're not
Yes.
like pro-incest in any way.
I really hope that concrete statement doesn't come back to haunt you, Joe. Right? When
It's not going to harm me in any way. I don't know what you plan to do later, Dave. But
who knows what the future holds, Joe? Trump was elected to office. Anything could happen.
But even then, it doesn't really reflect on me in any way. If it's not me that's actually doing it.
I'm going to move us on, and for the benefit of my continued employment, I think that's probably for the best.
Incest cast.
God, thank God no one
That's
listens
a
to
different
this.
podcast with three hairy white guys.
Thank-
So back to Love, the TV show. So we have that scene with Paul Rust, and like again, it's a fun character moment, and kind of like you get these moments of Apatow stuff. We get a lot with Gillian Jacobs as well, with like Judd Apatow stuff. A lot with the boyfriend. The scene that made me laugh the most is probably when he's like, "I've got to go," and this is like a 40-year-old man. My mum's taking me t-shirt shopping, and she's like, "I beg your pardon," and he's like, "Yeah, my mum's
pants shopping," because he's like, "I'm a human being. I deserve pants."
Yeah, and then she goes out to the car. She's like, "If
Love
you
this
go
line.
pants shopping with your mum, we're done." Blah 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 blah. And then she screams into the car with this guy and his mother, like,
To the mum.
"His cum is in me."
He's not my friend. His cum is still inside me.
His comment still is. I mean, that's it. That's a good thing to shout to the mother of your boyfriend ish whatever thing. That's an interesting thing to shout. It's a great line, and it's I mean, there you go. There's your comification of comedy tick right there. We get
quite
the
literally
bodily fluids reference in from the Apatow. Yeah.
Where do we think this TV show's going?
Yeah, I was going to ask that.
Well,
yeah.
I mean, it's basically going to be those two meeting each other because they do meet right at the end. So you have this whole thing where this boyfriend kind of takes her to this really weird, like, I don't know, what is it? It's like a kind of religious slash
Joe, it
cult
seems like
thing.
a cult.
It's Scientology, isn't it? I mean, because they're in LA, so it's like a cheap Scientology, I think.
And she kind of like,
you probably won't be like stalked and harassed and possibly murdered.
Yeah, she effectively then just gets to like the end of a tether, and she's like, "Yeah, this isn't going anywhere," and gets up on the stage, makes a bit of a dick of herself, and then like walks off. And then he effectively, screws up his threesome, and then it cuts to like another scene where they're in, I think it's like a service station or something like that, and she's trying to buy a coffee and realizes she doesn't actually have any money on her, and then the guy says that, well, if you don't have any money, you can't have the coffee, and she's like, she's just going to let it have cold. They have an argument about how now she's poured the coffee, like she should be able to drink it and then pay him later, and then Paul Rudd's character kind of appears and says, "Oh, I'll pay for that for you," and that's when they finally meet. So that's kind of the end of the first episode. Is the two of them finally getting together,
or is it Paul Rudd's clone?
That's what we really need. We need like a crossover between the two shows. Do
you think our listeners are as like into the canon of the episodes we've recently done? I feel like maybe we lean too heavily on that.
100%. Let's call him Raw Pod.
Raw Pod
instead. Yeah, it's a nice. So, what do we think? So, yeah, what's the next steps after this? Obviously, I think we're going to see the development of their relationship. Now, from what I understand, reading up through the reviews and just looking ahead at the plot, it appears actually that there's quite a decent like portrayal of relationships in this, and how two people meeting for the first time in a petrol station, and then kind of like that awkwardness of how you kind of get to know someone. Like it's I'm happily married, I've been in a long-term relationship, but even just like,
so he doesn't know what he's talking about.
No, but even just chatting to someone, like at a kid's party that you've never met before, like it's hard work. Your brain needs to be thinking about, what am I going to say next, and I should ask an interesting question, and all these things that you have to do. And I think that I kind of like the trajectory of this in terms of exploring that and watching these two losers like figure each other out and figure out how they can
try not to fuck it up again, basically.
Yeah, I'm compelled.
Yeah.
I'm compelled to watch more.
Yeah, I would agree, Sam. Actually, like I know, obviously, I mentioned off the top. We're not going to talk about this as a pilot because it's not what it's trying to do. Like Netflix knows from its algorithms that they've got 2 or 3 episodes to get you. Like usually, if it's a Netflix series, you're not just going to watch the first episode. And because of the way that Netflix budgets things, like the whole first season of this was made before any of it was released. So kind of like probably greenlit off the script, especially with someone like Judd Apatow at the helm. Like they're not worried. They're not worried about them losing money on this.
It's worth one season at least, even if
exactly.
it's worth.
Like we said, this has run for 3 seasons and has like pretty middling to decent reviews. The reviews I read certainly said that like the first 3 or 4 episodes are a bit dull, and then we're kind of like into the soup. We're into the good stuff, and that seems to be the fair norm for a Netflix show. I kind of
like you said, Dave. They know they have the full season. All they have to do in this first episode is effectively not be so fucking shit that you don't turn it off immediately. That's all they have to do.
Paging, Haunting of Hill House.
But apparently they weren't too shit because loads of people love that. So it's weird.
Yeah. Sorry, Paging. What was that terrible? Hoops. Hoops was the worst thing we've ever seen.
It was.
Yeah,
like my Bleach.
But this was a fun episode. Like there were funny bits mixed with like dramatic bits. It's a bit too fucky, like the word "fuck," not actually fucking, because I think we only actually see 2 sex scenes, which is relatively light for Judd Apatow.
3.
It's a bit sweary. Let's not bicker back and forth on that, Joe. It's a bit sweary, but like otherwise, I was entertained. I wasn't bored, and there were bits where I was like, "Get to the money," like when are these 2 going to meet? But I wasn't bored. I think it's quite well made. I think the cast is pretty good. I like Gillian Jacobs, obviously from Community and several other bits and pieces. Paul Rust, it turns out, I have seen before in several things in minor roles. He was in an episode of Parks and Rec I was watching last night, and I was like, oh, it's Paul Rust, whom I only just now realised was a person.
Oh, it's Raw Pod. Yeah,
it's Raw Pod.
Recognisable by his nose.
Paul Rudd. It's the clone of Paul Rudd, but the machine didn't do it right.
It got stuck on the nose a little bit. It just pulled it slightly.
Jesus, Joe, fucking hell.
So yeah, there's a lot here. Let's just stop a little bit, a minute on the Netflixness of this, because we have talked about this previously in our last couple of episodes. But I think let's try and crystallize it. Let's try and kind of like pin it down to the mechanics and a grand theory for this, because I think this is basically Netflix is making TV that no one watches, and it doesn't really care, and that's quite an extraordinary thing when you think about the basic idea of what television is supposed to be, is to be consumed.
Well, Sam, Netflix is a TV, it's a TV network for all intents and purposes, run by accountants, and I'm going to explain that. So, as opposed to a TV network which has a bunch of executives who really don't know what they're doing, and the economics of television are, honestly, sometimes it's very difficult to understand how anyone makes money. Netflix is very simple. They want subscribers. They don't give a shit if you're watching Netflix, but they want you to be paying for it. Yeah. So what they need to do is have enough like umbrella shows, big shows like Stranger Things is a good example, or like I'm sure there are other popular Netflix shows. Orange is the New Black, that was a Netflix show, wasn't it?
It doesn't even need to be Netflix though. Even if they have like stuff that people want to go back and watch, like Friends, for example.
Yeah, well, I'm getting to that, Joe. So we've got like they need to have big umbrella shows that they're making, like Stranger Things, like Orange is the New Black, together with basically they need Friends. Like they need your classic 90s sitcoms that people are going to binge, and then after you've got like a couple of big old things and a couple of big new things, you just need content, and they kind of like. They understand that it doesn't really matter if nobody watches whatever shitty Netflix film has been made this week as such, but if it gets people to, like, a good example is that Will Smith film with the orcs, the police. Like, you get a big name and it kind of doesn't matter if you make shite because it gets people in, they buy a subscription, and the way the human brain works, usually people don't cancel these things very quick, so Netflix is getting its money.
It's how Kevin James keeps getting work.
Yes. That Adam Sandler account for 100% of his paychecks.
The biggest difference, this is obvious, but the biggest difference is advertising. Like there isn't a need to get eyeballs on it. Every single show is measured by how many people watched it, how many people watched the ads, and those ads transfer into, pay per million or whatever it is, that the rates that TV networks charge. If Netflix doesn't have those ads, there isn't any reason to kind of for people to watch it. Now that's kind of good, isn't it? This idea of the TV that no one's watching is good, because it means that if you love, aggressive, shouty, redneck animated TV shows, brilliant. Netflix has you covered for at least a season. If you love, horror shows that are sedate and boring, brilliant. Netflix got you covered. So Netflix can segment its audiences in a really interesting way. And so a show like this, which is, it's broader than the ones we've watched previously, I think, but it's certainly hitting a niche of people who are in that, in their 30s and want to kind of relish that a little bit.
We've seen dozens of shows with this exact same premise, but it's about, and I would say as well, it's about divorced people in their 40s and 50s, or it's about teenagers, but or people in their early 20s, but we very rarely get the in between. I think it's again, that societal rejection of people in the 30s have it together, they're all fine, blah blah blah. So like you said, Sam, it is hitting a niche, and it's interesting that we get such a breadth. I mean, I haven't watched that many Netflix shows really, but I've seen the ads for this probably since it came out. I've seen it because Netflix suggests things to watch. I've seen this on the suggestions of things to watch dozens of times. It's kind of why I thought of it as something that we could watch.
Probably because Netflix knows who you are. It has all the data about all. If you've watched Friends over and over and over again, then it's let's
6 people share my Netflix. Netflix has no fucking clue who I am.
Brilliant.
So there is just one other.
I watch Star Trek. I watch Spirit Riding Free, which is a kids' cartoon about a girl with a horse. I watch iCarly incessantly, and whatever shite Ross and Amy watch. Oh, and that person, I had a mirror, a profile that just popped up on my Netflix for 2 years, and I didn't do anything about it until they tried to change my account password. I was just like, that's fine, you just watch my Netflix, no problem.
How rude. You've given them 2 years of free Netflix and they're trying to change your password.
I'm a philanthropist, Sam. I just don't have any money.
Come on.
I'm being endowing libraries, but what I can do is give a hacker Netflix for 2 years.
I was going to say, there is a third kind of show that they have as well. They tend to so if there's popular TV shows that get dropped by other stations, they can pick them up. So they've done it with Lucifer, for example.
Yeah. Was that a Prime show initially?
That was a Prime initially, and that was dropped, and then Netflix picked it up.
And is it the same with The Expanse, or is that the other way around? Because that's another show that got dropped by one of the streaming giants and then got picked up by somebody else.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, they've done it with a few shows, I think, where it's a popular show on another platform that basically gets cancelled, and then they'll pick it up for another couple of seasons, basically. And that's another way of getting subscribed, because obviously if they've been watching it on Amazon
you attract
Prime,
that fan base, don't you?
Yeah.
Even if what you make is shite, and this is what Netflix realizes, let's not institute this incredibly high bar. We aren't HBO. We don't need to make everything to the same standard. Let's just crank it out. Let's make sure it. I will say most Netflix shows look pretty good. They're filmed, pretty well and streamed pretty well. And that's kind of what they realized. They're like, right, as long as the stream quality is good, we can almost drop almost every other mark of quality and it's fine. Let's just get stuff out there. Let's just fill the library.
Actually, Arrested Development's another good example of that as well, actually.
Yes. That's the example, isn't it? Yeah, that's a little bit because Netflix is there's this perception it doesn't make any money because a lot of its revenue in the past was venture capitalist funding, so basically just people pumping money and hoping to get a return. That's kind of changed a little bit. They are now making profit. They are actually profitable in that sense. However, there's lots of the dodgy accounting, but also because their spending on content has dropped, and it takes us back to the reason why there are so many Netflix originals, and they kind of pioneered that thing as well of we're just going to chuck billions and billions into producing content. It's because Friends is expensive as shit. Every single one of them needs $1 million check once a week. All the friends, even fucking Gunter, needs a goddamn check. So like TV like that is expensive. So what do? Well, let's make our own. That costs us nothing. We pay, we pay Judd Apatow a few million. We pay these actors, and then it just sits on the shelves. And
I mean, other than Gillian Jacob and Paul Russ, did you recognise any of the other actors in this? No. There was the other guy at her work actually. He's been in a couple of things, and I've forgotten his name.
That's like but what Sam's getting at, Joe, is kind of like it's the actors' wages are actors' wages, and like residuals. Obviously, Netflix will have its own rules with residuals. The thing with Friends, the reason the Friends costs so much is because it costs so much for whichever network produced Friends, that they know that like, well, this is our cash cow. It cost us, like you said, per episode at the end of Friends. The Friends were getting $1 million each. That's $6 million per episode before you fucking turn the camera on. And so they're recouping all that money now, today, by licensing Friends out to streaming giants rather than doing it themselves. And like the Netflix show, yes, they've paid to produce it and they've paid those fees. But then after that, it's free. They own it. They own the rights to it. They don't need to license it from somebody else. They can show it in the UK. They can show it in Ireland. They can show it in America and Canada, wherever. They don't need to worry about licensing it.
And Netflix has spent $16 billion in the last 10 years doing so. So now they're saying we don't need to borrow any more money. We are actually profitable. But it's taken a heck of a lot of time to do that. And so shows like this are probably, these Netflix originals that we've been, trudging through. We're probably going to see less and less of those over the next wee while, where subscriber count is now being challenged. Disney Plus is a big, foothold in this. There's Peacock, there's HBO, there's all these different services
Apple
that are now
TV
competing,
and stuff.
Yeah, competing for your time. And so Apple Players. And so now Netflix, like, what do? They can't really afford to keep buying Friends. Are they making more content, or is this business model going to fail? Because I think there's a real potential for this whole thing to crash down. This golden age of television,
sure,
that we've lived through, just to go pop.
TV shows don't run as long on streaming for some reason, and that isn't always the rule, because obviously Lucifer's gone for about 15 seasons or whatever it is. But this has had 3 seasons, and I think Netflix has said that's it. That the next season is going to be the last one. And like they do this quite a lot. Like even Orange is the New Black, that ran for sort of 7-8 seasons, and then they were like, "Yeah, we're done with this now." So I think there's like a shorter shelf life for a streaming TV show, because Netflix knows, for instance, and this is something that network television could never do with the same sort of accuracy. Netflix knows how many people are watching the first episode of Love, for instance. They know how many people are watching the first 30 seconds and turning it off. They know how many people are going on from the first episode and watching the second episode. Not just a Nielsen rating, like your total numbers.
Yeah.
They know that you pause the episode halfway through to go for a piss. They have all of that data. So they kind of use that to say, right, what's the drop-off been, not per episode, but per fucking minute. Like how many people have watched 3 episodes of the latest season and then stopped? Like that then informs whether something gets renewed. And so the goalposts have moved.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So just a couple of other things. Sorry, I was just going to say I was going to move back onto the kind of the show specifically, but if you've got something else to mention, Sam.
It's just today's point of they know everything. There was a story a year or so ago of someone who watched, and Netflix tweeted this. They watched Lord of the Rings, Fellowship of the Ring, 361 times in, I think, the space of a year.
That's impressive.
It is, and I think eventually they found the woman who said that it was something to do like getting a baby to sleep or something. That there seemed to be something that was settling about this, this fantasy movie. So Netflix knows, and Netflix is interested. The
thing I read, Sam, was that somebody had watched B Movie, the Jerry Seinfeld movie, 200 times in a year, and basically Netflix had sent them an email to ask if they were okay. It's everything. Someone at Netflix had seen this and gone, something's up here, and so they sent an email saying you okay? Is everything going all right?
Is this some kind of code?
B Movie a lot.
I think it's
watching Lord of the Rings on loop. Sure, that's one thing. Watching B Movie, it's a different thing.
Sorry, Joe. What are you going to say?
So just on this show, so the other character in this, or the other actor I recognised was Brett Gelman, who was her, I don't know if he was a boss or work colleague who told her to fire Rob, and he is in Fleabag. I think he's her sister. I think Fleabag's sister's husband. I think.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I know who you mean.
Well done, Joe. Good spot.
So he was the other one. Yeah, Fleabag's great. So he was the other one I recognised in this. Yeah. And then the other thing I was just going to mention was the product placement right at the start as well. The first scene. They're both lying in bed basically on the laptops, and it's like they're square in front of you. I think one's a Samsung and one's Apple, isn't it? Something like that. So they've got both of them. Money.
You know what? Like, I get what you're saying, Joe, but at the same time, like, for the production, it's so much easier to just use laptops that you have lying around than to let's mock up a pair, or it's Apple, but let's not advertise for them. Like, sometimes it's just we've got two laptops. Yeah, great. One of them's a MacBook and one of them's
no, it's completely it's completely measured. Like, they're going to be going. Apple's like, no bad guys are having our laptop. That is a real thing. Like, they don't let bad guys have their phones and stuff like that. It is
only in real life do bad guys have Apple products, like Apple.
Yeah.
Apple pays to be nice to you.
It is always egregious, and I would just say, speaking from my MacBook Air with my Sony headphones and my Yeti Blue microphone, we will accept absolutely anything. Please just get in touch.
We are just desperate to be paid to do the advertising that we basically do for free. Like,
Have it your way.
Look, it is. Pay me. But I should say, like, we're kind of not circling the drain here, but we haven't talked about this episode for a while.
Oh, there's nothing to talk about.
I think this is kind of like a tentative one thumbs up from me. I'm probably going to watch more of this.
Yeah.
Like, I didn't watch more of it there and then. I haven't been like, I wonder what's happening, but I'm probably going to watch more of this. I enjoyed it enough. I didn't hate it, and I think maybe we're all sort of on the same page there, except Joe.
Yeah. No, I'm probably on the same page. Like, I'm not going to instantly watch more of it, but if, like, at some point I'm looking for something to watch and I accidentally stumble across it, and, I think I could get into it, but I'm also not at the point where I'm like, oh, dear God, I need to watch more of this. It's not, it's not that kind of show. It's kind of like a middle of the road kind of TV show, really. If you're looking for something to kill a few hours, go for it.
That really appeals to me. Like, only 3 seasons. I could just watch it and then be done. That'd be fantastic. Wouldn't that be great?
I've exhausted Suits. I just can't deal with that show anymore. She's planning ahead.
Season 56 or something now.
Oh my! With the fortitude only known to Joe, it's just horrific. But I think this is a good show that we would sit down and watch together, because it's kind of like it's kind of that type of show, isn't it? You can sit and enjoy it. It's light enough and it's not too long, and
it doesn't require too much effort to like sit and watch if you're not trying to like work things out or having to pay attention that much.
High praise from the Imaginary Movie Podcast.
Yeah,
a tentative will eventually get to.
Maybe
we'll be back next week with another show. Are we, Joe? Can you confirm? Are we past scheduled episodes?
No, we have one more. Modern Family.
What is it?
Christ. Modern Family, though, good show. Network. Network show.
And a proper pilot, I think. A network show.
Pilot. Yeah.
And I think we're going to
do
more.
Is it on Netflix or
Netflix or something?
It's on Now TV and it's on Netflix, I believe.
Cool.
Brilliant. And hopefully we don't discuss incest ever again on this podcast.
Well, I would like to say we haven't actually mentioned Star Trek. We haven't mentioned Star Trek yet, so...
Joe,
you ruined it.
I did mention NFL earlier as well, so like we've really gone around the houses on this. We'll see you next week, listeners, for Modern Family. Buckle in.
Bye-bye.